Good afternoon and welcome to another one of our wonderful, wonderful webinars. We partnered with Sanofi, and it's just an amazing opportunity to share this valuable information with you. I'm Charlene Castle, National Director of Epilepsy South Africa, and absolutely privileged to be with you today. Epilepsy South Africa, the only organization that focuses and serves people solely with epilepsy and those affected by epilepsy. With me today, we are just so privileged and excited to be speaking to Dr. Prakash Kathan, and he's a practicing neurologist at Donald Gordon. So welcome to you today. We look forward to hearing from you. We've got Deidre Ras, a practicing biokineticist, and thank you for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you, and also look forward to hearing what you've got to say. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Tim de Villiers. Tim is parents for one of the founders of Epilepsy South Africa. Tim's a person living with epilepsy himself, as am I. So it's wonderful to have you with us all the way from the cold Cape today. And thank you for flying up and joining us. So once again, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to ask immediately, and I think jump in and just throw it to Prakash and say to him, just tell us about epilepsy. Share with us, what is epilepsy? Let's like stamp out the stigma a bit and take the myths out of this word that everybody's so afraid of. So just share with us.
So I'll try and keep things as simple as I can. Epilepsy is a condition where someone has had seizures and has a predisposition to having more seizures. So it's diagnosed when someone has had 2 seizures or more, or when someone has had 1 seizure and an abnormal EEG. And basically what that does is it gives the doctor or neurologist an understanding that this person will have more seizures and there's a need to treat and protect them from getting further seizures with the treatments, usually medication. Then in terms of what seizures or epileptic seizures are, epileptic seizures are basically episodes of neuronal dysfunction, or that means the brain cells are not functioning well because of excessive electrical activity or excitation of those brain cells. And that can happen with either a few brain cells in one part of the brain, or it can happen with the whole brain. And that understanding will help us to also to know what types of epilepsy there are. So if it's just with a group of brain cells in one part of the brain, then it's called focal epilepsy.
Okay.
And depending where that type of seizure is in the brain, it brings different symptoms. For example, one of the more common types of focal epilepsy is a temporal lobe epilepsy. And in the temporal lobe, there's certain symptoms that you ask patients about. And those symptoms are like things, abnormal smells that they have that other people don't, which we call olfactory hallucinations, or things like deja vu. And those are the focal symptoms for temporal lobe epilepsy, but different parts of the brain will have different other symptoms, and then you'll know that someone is having a focal seizure. And then focal seizures can also spread, and it can also cause a disruption in consciousness in some patients. And then focal seizures can also spread further and cause what is called a generalized seizure. So generalized seizures, when the whole brain, that means all the brain cells, are having this seizure, which is, as I mentioned, is a synchronized electric-like discharge, or the brain cells are discharging of the brain at the same time. And if it's the whole brain, the more less intense version of a generalized seizure is what used to be called petit mal, but we now call it absence seizure. And that's usually when someone is staring maybe for a few seconds, typically. and then the other one is a generalized tonic-clonic seizure. And there are other types of generalized seizures which are not as frequent, but the generalized tonic-clonic seizure is the type of seizure that people most common that comes to their mind when they think of seizures or fits, convulsions, where the patient falls to the floor and becomes stiff, jerks, is unresponsive, and can pose a danger to them to themselves when they're having that type of a seizure. And it's followed often by confusion.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing you say, I mean, it's so fascinating what you're saying about the brain cells and the collection, the small amount in the whole brain. I haven't heard it explained like that, and it just makes so much sense in terms of the types of seizures. And I think when people understand the different seizures, like you've said, it really helps them understand what's going on. I mean, as a person with epilepsy, I'll have absent seizures. And one of the things my whole life has said, but you don't listen. And the truth is I do listen, but I'll be listening to you and I'll miss 15 seconds of what you say. And that's been hard in itself to manage because everyone around you needs education. So, yeah, and one of the things you touched on also was first aid, of when somebody falls onto the floor with a seizure and their whole body is going, and I think that also people are scared of. So we're going to talk a lot about today is about education and sharing with all of you as our audience, really what to do and what this looks like. I want to just move on to Tim. And Tim, you've lived with epilepsy like I have for many, many, many years. Tell me about your sporting. Tell me what you were discouraged from doing. Tell me what you have been doing, and just share one or two experiences, valuable experiences that have happened in your life.
Well, I started doing sport back at school. It was mainly high school, when as soon as they realize you have epilepsy, you're sort of this marked character in the school, and you are. But anyway, I wasn't ever really into team sports or contact sports like rugby and that, but I enjoyed swimming, and I was quickly told that I shouldn't be swimming for the school any longer, and I guess the school had their own reasons for that. And the same with cross-country running. I had a fall once, and then I had to sort of pull back from that. And it didn't really leave me with a lot of options. In those days, we had to choose a sport at school. And so when it dwindled down to, oh, well, maybe I must take up badminton, then I just said to my folks, it's not me. I used to cycle as my sort of transport, and so I started cycling distances, and I enjoyed cycling. And then when I one year was in matric, a friend said, well, let's do the Cape Town cycle tour. That was in 1981. I did my first one, and I enjoyed it, and I thought, well, this is what I'm going to do. Probably not the most, a lot of people think, well, cycling is also a risk, has its risks, but I think, and yes, I had a few falls along the way. I think what's
because of having a seizure, Tim? Did you
yes. So I think what people need to do, and I, in my 20s, back then, really got to learn about my condition, and that's when I used to run that Epicare support group. I started a support group, and I think the most important thing to do in one's life is to actually first understand what condition you have, and then manage it properly. Try and understand how to manage it, and taking medications regularly, and actually monitor yourself and get a feeling for how your condition, your thresholds, your what triggers your triggers. Sit down after you've had the seizure and think back, gosh, what did I do in the last 24 to 48 hours? Maybe there was unnecessary stress, or there's something you've had to eat or drink or whatever that created a situation that triggered you to have a seizure. So it comes down to the individual. Everyone is different. And once you can work out who you are and what you are, then try and be responsible about fitting in, doing a sport that fits into your life.
You mentioned, just to interject, you mentioned while we were sitting chatting that you did a really long swim. Just share that was quite a share that experience with us, because you must have been seriously discouraged from doing that.
I think, look, I used to swim in any way, but I had sort of got my life with epilepsy sorted out, sort of late 20s, and so I didn't take up swimming at the time as a sport. I actually took it up at the time when I, at the age of 40, I had a friend that did long distance swimming, and I thought, well, I'm going to go training as well and give it a shot, because I enjoyed swimming, and I started doing long distance swimming, and I used to enter these mile swims as well in dams and across the bay at Fishhook and things like that.
Very brave.
People, and I used to train 100 lengths of a gym swimming pool, and then do 2 underwater lengths as well. And people used to say, but you know, you have epilepsy, and what if you have a seizure and drown? And I said, well, and it's the way you think, but I just sort of said, well, you know, at least I went out doing something I was enjoying.
And I think
and I think we don't think about these things, but that was my answer. But I enjoyed the swimming, and I didn't keep it. I swam for a few years, doing the long distance swims, and it was open water swimming. That's what they call it.
Discouraged. It's so interesting.
No, I wasn't discouraged. I think I probably gave
encouraged. I mean, I want to talk to Deidre, because she's chomping, I think, right now to share with us about that. We're talking support, and we haven't got there yet. It sounds like, hey, Deidre, we need to.
I think I gave my parents lots of grey hairs.
I did too.
but cycling was my thing. Always has been. It still is. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I know. I must tell you, I think it took me many years to talk about my epilepsy. So when I hear somebody just been speaking about his epilepsy for so many years, I really admire it, because it comes with an emotional, I'm sharing about my epilepsy, right? And I remember some sports events, just my parents were there. I was fortunate enough, they gave me, I had a pony, and I went to a show, and they told everybody I had epilepsy. So when I had a seizure, I just would round and round the arena. They would all wait for me to finish, and I would carry on jumping in the arena. But talking about that, I'm going to just pass on. Deidre, talk to us about the structures in schools. With what do those structures look like for people with epilepsy? What do we need to be doing? What do we need to be telling the schools? What do we need in place?
So really interesting what Tim is saying. And like, listen, swimming those miles are dangerous, or like a little bit daunting if you have epilepsy or not. But his experience is not coming from a lack of education. His experience is coming from, or his adventures is coming from a point of understanding epilepsy, understanding what triggers him, and being educated enough and cautious in a way, but knowing the limitations for him. So I wouldn't advise anyone to just go for a mile swim if you are not sure of what those triggers are.
100%.
Like making sure, like if you know and it is well controlled, you can basically do any sport. The research out there is that contact sport does not increase your risk for having a seizure. It's actually more advised now to be physical active because of the other benefits that comes with exercise as well. And we've briefly spoke about it, like just the organ health and mental health. I think a lot of people with epilepsy have a lot of fear. And that is coming from a point of being uneducated. And even the schools, your school saying that maybe you should select another sport. It's not because they were so concerned with your health. It's more a fear of them and their liability and a place of being uneducated. So in sports, for me, at schools, in your teams, is education. Educating your team, making sure, like you said, everyone knew you had epilepsy. So they knew what would need to happen when a seizure happens. And knowing the difference between your different types of seizures as well is key for the people at sport. Educating your coaches, educating your teammates, educating the staff, educating your fellow athletes' parents to know, like, this is what would happen, and this is how you need to help me in that situation, being safe, or just step back and just control the environment. And that is key for me. And then in sport yourself, making sure that you know your triggers. Is it dehydration that tend to increase your risk? Is it a lack of sleep, fatigue? So making sure that if you're a runner, let's say you say cross country, if you know fatigue is your trigger, knowing where your limitations are, knowing when it might be a different day that you might have not slept as well, to say, maybe I should skip tomorrow's race. And that is the responsible act. It's not being, I'm going to let my team down, but saying, like, I need to look out for myself and what triggers me. If it's dehydration and it's a hotter day, take some extra fluid. So most of the sports are discouraged where there's an increased risk of being injured when you have the seizure. It's not so much the sport that causes the seizure, but more being an increased risk. Yes, skydiving is probably
really interesting.
A lot more high risk in terms of when you have a seizure, that it's not great. Deep sea diving, most individual sports are, because you're alone. But if you do individual sport like cross country, but within a group, you're not alone. If you want to be a runner and you're going to go out for a run by yourself, make sure that someone knows that you are running. Where are you running? And have a emergency contact notification, of whether it's a bracelet or something on your phone, that people know that if something happens, this is how you should treat it. So it's not so much the sport to avoid, but knowing your triggers and managing that.
And I think you've hit something so important on the head. And thank you for really talking about the schools and the structures, because I don't think schools speak about epilepsy enough. And if they did, if we all like this, make it natural to be talking about, I think schools could really, really assist in this regard, that children would say, okay, yeah, I have epilepsy, I know I'm not going to be marginalized. I was in a huge hall recently, and I asked everybody who has epilepsy in the room. And I knew 5 people in the room that had epilepsy, and not one of them put their hands up. And I actually, in the back of my mind, was like, that is how critical it is that we're speaking and speaking and speaking about it. So interesting, the different points you're raising: mental health, sleep, food. I think that applies to everybody, and so much more. I know as people with epilepsy, health is wealth. It's brain health. I just want to,
I know what I wanted to say, like as a cyclist, I mean, I cycle and I mountain bike, my wife and I do. But we cycle with a club, and it's comes down to safety in numbers, right?
Absolutely.
From whether it be incidents or seizures, if there are any, or security. So, but when one gets into a sport like that, and especially when you're doing 100 kilometers or something like that, you need to understand what foodstuffs and drinks and things like that you have to sustain you over that as well. And those are things one also has to learn, like you were talking about just now. So, it's a very important part of it. And they always say it's good to have, eat real food and not just a whole lot of supplements. And
what I want to just direct us to is Prakash, because I'm sure you're sitting here chomping from a neurology space going, oh, I need to jump into that, I need to jump into that. But you see patients all the time. You see children, you see teenagers, you see adults, you see a range of patients with ages. And what are the sports that you kind of go, you have epilepsy, and please just be careful because of the severity or that you're mild. And just, if you can just give us a sense from a doctor's perspective around that, just give us the views.
Just in general about sport.
Yeah. What are your advice to your patients in terms of sports, your advice and saying, your advice, your perspective, your medical expertise, if you just talk to that for us. So,
I see children, but more adolescents, basically over the age of like 13 or 13 and over. But in general, in my dealings and understanding of sport and epilepsy, I would say that it's mainly, there's two concerns, and probably the one concern is the main concern. So the main concern in general is it going to be dangerous for a person to do a certain type of sport, and then understanding the level of danger for each type. And then, like, for example, when Tim went on his, his long distance open water.
He's about to do this stuff.
So red flags.
So, for example, taking that into account, that would be considered dangerous in a person whose epilepsy is not well controlled. But let's say swimming in general is the main sport that most neurologists or doctors think about when it comes to danger with epilepsy, because someone is in a body of water and they risk getting water into their lungs, drowning.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what many people think about in terms of epilepsy, but it's not the only sport. But we're going to get to basically how I view it in general, and it's also can be deep sea diving or scuba diving, as Deidre mentioned. But essentially, with that type of sport, you maybe consider it higher in terms of the risk of danger. And then there's sports like, I think he said he was advised to do like maybe badminton. That might be.
I'm going skydiving. Okay, okay, doc.
So that might be considered less dangerous. So in that way, but it's very important to individualize each and every person with epilepsy. It's very important to individualize every case or situation with them. So in general, my general approach is to look at epilepsy as a condition where someone has these events. We call them seizures, and I explained what that's about. But essentially, the type of seizure that you're most worried about is not the focal seizure where someone is having some sort of maybe symptom, like I explained about the abnormal smells or those kinds of things, but where their concentration, focus, or consciousness is compromised. So that can be with an absence seizure. It can be with a generalized tonic-clonic seizure, which is obviously the most concerning one. but it can be with those other focal seizures where the consciousness is disrupted as well.
Yeah.
So we call it focal seizures with impaired consciousness. So, or awareness. So if a seizure like that happens in a compromising situation, in the water, scuba diving, skydiving, but I think it's like driving. That's usually the most common thing that patients with epilepsy are worried about. They're concerned about whether or not they can drive, or if it's their parents, and let's say it's a student learning to drive, should he learn to drive or she? But essentially, if the patient is a well-controlled epileptic, there are certain provisos or recommendations that can be given in terms of a time period from the last seizure or something with regards to driving. But it's the same sort of thinking with epilepsy because it's actually the same situation.
Okay.
But driving is probably a more, so Tim, with regard to the swim again, is
we're going back to a long distance swimming, Tim.
It is very important because he had an understanding of his own risk. He had an understanding of the likelihood that he was going to get a seizure, which was minimal because he had maybe so many years or that of seizure freedom.
Understood my auras and all that.
So he had that sort of confidence, but he also had that acceptance of a risk that if it happens, then this will happen. But with driving, it's different. So there is this general similarity, but there's this difference with driving. You can pose a danger to other people on the road, whereas with most sports, the danger is to yourself. And with swimming in particular, with open water swimming on your own, it would be very dangerous, right? From an epileptic situation or from that sort of viewpoint. But competitive swimming, like the type of sport that you were forbidden from participating in, that type of swimming is probably less concerning because there's other people around. Yeah. There's often someone watching, a coach or a lifeguard or something like that. So in terms of understanding, I think that understanding of danger is important. And then the other part of sport with epilepsy is there are certain conditions where epilepsy can be triggered from that type of sport, usually due to traumatic brain injury in terms of things like, let's say, rugby or combat sports like boxing or MMA. So that's the other addition from a sport point of view.
What do you say to a person with epilepsy as a teenager? Rugby's huge in South Africa. What do you say to a teenager when they are a brilliant athlete, they're pretty well controlled, they haven't had a seizure for quite some time, and they get selected for the A rugby side? What's your advice? What are you saying? I think both of you can jump in on this. I'd like to hear both of you.
Yeah. So as Deidre mentioned earlier, a sport or exercise in general is very good for a person's health. Okay. And like Tim didn't want to do badminton. Some people...
Tim, I'm not doing badminton either.
Some people won't want to do some sports and they will want to do other sports. And let's say this person's very talented in rugby and they're well controlled in terms of their epilepsy. I myself would not discourage them if they understood the risks involved, if they or their parents understood that. But it must be explained, these are the risks. This is the danger with rugby. And most people who do rugby understand, even patients who do not have epilepsy, there are risks involved.
Risks with everything.
I think you're hitting on such a critical point here. So we understand the risk of a sport. We also know the nature of a person with epilepsy. So when I say that, it's like, as a person with epilepsy, you kind of have this innate rebel in you. I can't even, it's like innately, well, I can do this. I got this. And you're going to tell me not to. And it's kind of that thing that's been built in, that is built in. Tim, am I right? You kind of almost get a zig with it that, come on, you're telling me I can't. Of course I can. I'm controlled. So the reason I'm bringing this up is you've now got a rebellious teenager who is eating healthy, but wakes up that morning going, I'm going to play rugby share, and because I'm doing that, I don't feel like taking my meds because he's so excited. Is he at risk? How are we guiding our teenagers and our young people with sports? I'm hearing everything you say, but what are the precautions? Like you've mentioned sleep, you've mentioned food. Tell us about teenagers not taking their meds. And then going and jumping on sports fields.
Yeah, that's probably the number one thing in terms of triggers would be not being compliant with the medication or taking the medication properly. And then I think the second or after that would be not sleeping enough. Those two things are very big in terms of a seizure happening, whether or not they do play a sport. A seizure could still happen. And I think that it just increases the risk of a seizure, and that is the danger. But for most sport in general, it is a risk that they themselves are taking for themselves. And I think in general, because they're so young, they maybe don't care, and
they get like
rebelling. But I think that if they understood that that this is a condition, and you can live a completely normal life as an epileptic on medication, or an epileptic who's well controlled at a certain point of view off medication, then I think that they can basically have the life they want. My first actually encounter with epilepsy as a condition was when I was growing up, when I heard about John T. Rhodes.
He was one of our ambassadors.
So I heard that he has this condition called epilepsy, and he was one of my heroes in terms of cricket, and he was playing international cricket with epilepsy.
And I think he just spoke so openly about it and changed so many lives. I want to just ask, Tim, you were going to say something. I think I can see you chomping. You wanted to add to what
I think what's important is that, when people have got have accepted their condition, and they've got their head around doing things, and once they're actually out there doing a sport, I think it takes their minds off their condition. And there's this positive energy that you get out of doing a sport that you enjoy doing. And I think that's part of it lifts people. And I know in mountain biking, for argument's sake, I come down some technical trails down the mountain. You're making a different decision every second. You cannot think about anything else in your mind. Epilepsy is the least important thing in my mind, and your focus is elsewhere. And I feel once you're sort of fairly well controlled in your condition, and you've chosen a sport that you're happy doing and you're excited about doing, and enjoy, certain subconscious, I talk about the subconscious again, one's condition might actually become less of a problem. Let's put it that way. I won't say it'll heal it, but it'll become less of a problem. And that's how I've experienced my own life. The more confident I've got in my life, the more positive I've become in my life, the fewer seizures became. Now I hardly have any.
Deidre, can I just ask you, how does a bio come in to support a person with epilepsy? Like, where do you come into in that regard?
Yeah. So a biokineticist, for those that don't know, is a clinical exercise specialist. We are registered with the Health Professional Council, and we manage patients in a variety of injuries. But in terms of epilepsy and neurological disorders, we help patients with epilepsy, but also a lot of patients have other comorbidities as well. And with the medication, there's a few things as well. There might be weight gain related to that. Depression could also be, like you said, the anxiousness. Mm-hmm. So as a biokineticist, what we can do is help you manage, especially in those early stages where, let's say, you've never been active, but now all of a sudden you have this drive, or you listen to this webinar and you're like, well, actually, I can do sport, but I don't know where to start. A biokineticist can help you with working with your medical team, with your neurologist, to get you to a place of feeling confident and managing those other factors in your. I mean,
a person coming to you with epilepsy, it's overweight, as an example.
Yes.
I mean, when they don't know where to start, that's a good starting.
Yes. So we can help you with a program to not trigger you, to say, let's manage that the program, let's manage the progression, because exercise is a stress on the body. It's a good stress compared to anxiety, but it is a stress on the body. So we as the professionals will look at all those stresses in your body to say, let's find the good balance. Let's make sure your nutrition, that we'll work with a dietitian with that to say, okay, let's make sure that when you start exercising, that you have all the information of what is needed. We help improve balance. We help to improve muscle strength. We make sure that all those different factors in the body is well balanced. And that is where we then come in.
I mean, one of the questions I often get is sport seen as a therapy for a person with epilepsy? And I always say, we're talking about mental health here. We're talking about your body de-stressing. So can you both just put input? I mean, I think Tim and I could jump straight into this because we both, yes, for us, yes, it is. Yes, it's a whole lot of yeses because of our brain health. But I'd like to hear from Prakash. Maybe you start there. You start with us. Why should we see this therapy? Why, with epilepsy, should we be doing sport?
So I think why persons or patients with epilepsy should do sport is the same reason. Well, I would say sport/exercise, because everyone should be doing exercise. Exercise is essential for the health of the body and health of the brain. So for people with epilepsy not to do exercise would be bad for them. So I
think that's wonderful to say so outright, because it is. It releases certain things in the brain, not one brain, that balances all those chemical releases, that takes down the electricity in the brain for a simpler way of as reducing the electricity, because you're reducing the stress. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, that is exactly it. Without getting too technical about it, but when you exercise, all the hormonal responses that you get, the increased blood flow to the brain, increases your brain health, the oxygen moving around in the body. Exercise is the part of making sure all the systems in the body gets enough oxygen, it gets enough blood flow, and that's what you need to do. The research out there is amazing at how exercise and healthier individuals have lower lower risks of having seizures. So exercise as part of your therapy is just as important as taking your medication, and eventually hopefully getting off medication is how having that healthy lifestyle. If you don't have that, and it's not about being like physically in good shape. That is not your main focus. Just looking good shouldn't be your focus in any scenario, but your main focus should be general overall health, organ health, mental health. Being physically strong should be your main focus in terms of keeping your body going, keeping your body less at risk for seizures. Replacing good stresses, bad stresses with your good stress. That is the main thing. Exercise is a good stress. And like you said, with more exercise, more confidence in terms of what I can do. When you have that, almost that oomph back in life of like, I shouldn't just sit and do nothing or shouldn't just wait for a seizure to happen. I think a lot of people in the early stages, it's just like, I don't know if I should go out, if I should go for a run, because I don't know when a seizure will happen, like taking your mind off that.
Talk about fear, like you mentioned earlier. It's fear-based.
We don't want fear-based. We really want people doing sports to be aware and being educated, and I don't want to say cautious, but being cautious when you encounter sport, but don't be fearful and don't be scared. I think that is the main thing, is like, go out, go for a run, go for a controlled swim. Don't start with the open water swim, but do the sport that you love. Find a thing that drives passion and really just gives you that mental oomph in your life that you need.
I want to really go to Tim, because what I do know is that our doctor touched on it earlier, was space post having medication and being seizure free and coming off your medication. So what are the risks? I mean, I'd like to hear from Tim, and the reason is because I know you've had long periods of, I don't know, no medication or with medication or very controlled. Have you been off your medication and then done a sport concurrent, Tim?
No, I've always taken my medication, but it goes back to understanding my condition and learning how to manage it properly. And I had to get myself into, because I know the medication is quite important, and that's why we go and see a neurologist. We get prescribed the right medicines and so on. And if they work for you, then, and it does. So anyway, I make sure I take them consistently. I've always done I prepare myself so I don't do anything reckless, like going out and having a party the night before going to do a long cycle ride, because then I'm just putting myself at even greater risk. Or go and have a whole lot of glasses of wine on a Friday night and then knowing that I'm riding on Saturday, because then I'm just heightening the risks of potential seizures. So it's just a case of being responsible about what we do. And what was the other point?
I think that's really, it's interesting, because you've never been off medication. I mean, from my side, I was off medication for a number of years, seizure free. It was actually quite a long period, and then my epilepsy started again for a range of reasons. And during that time is I did carry on with sport. I did have a very active lifestyle, and you know, one of the things that I think both of you, all three of you, are mentioning so much in this topic is, even for the most overweight, the most unfit person, the message is keep moving, because your epilepsy will be triggered with unhealthy lifestyle. It will escalate. And one of the things also is, you know, breaking that stigma, breaking that fear is about education. And that's why we're here today, is that saying to people with epilepsy, you have epilepsy, get out there, go for a walk around the block. Don't be scared of walking X amount of things. Make sure you do your steps a day. Make sure, even if you're a person that eats is in certain circumstances that they can't eat healthy, but find a way. Plant vegetable gardens, access. Yeah, Tim.
I just, you know, some people say, oh, but it's expensive. I'm saying people who maybe can't afford to. There are park runs. Join a group, join a park run. Just go. It doesn't have to be a run. It could be a trot, or
a walk.
And
and epilepsy, you write on your profile when you register for it.
Exactly. Or go and walk on the mountain. It doesn't have to cost you anything to do. You know, people have often said, oh, but cycling is very expensive. Yes, it is, but then don't go and get an expensive bike when you start out. And you know, work your way into, and if it doesn't sort of related to shoes, you know, I'm a size 11. If it doesn't fit me, then then try something else, you know. Well, it is. Do the sport that ultimately you'll enjoy doing, and you'll enjoy. You don't have to do something because you feel you've got to move. And you talked about you know, people sitting in a box and that. I think that there are still people with epilepsy out there whose parents seem to put them in a box, and that's where they don't really. It doesn't help them at all in their lives. They don't get to move out of that, and they just. I don't think that it doesn't help them get over their condition properly. And
you know, Tim, I think you're talking to something else, and Deidre touched on it, is the sense of belonging, the sense of that emotional confidence that I am okay as a person with epilepsy, and I'm a person first. I have epilepsy, and to be a person first means let's eat correctly, let's live healthily, let's caretake self. Because that enables me to do the sport. That enables me to, I mean, Deidre, you look like you want to add to that. And we don't have much more time. So, yeah.
Yeah, like in my practice and generally biokineticist, we advise people to be like, your condition is not your end goal. Like a lot of people go and they try to find a diagnosis, and once they have that diagnosis, they hold on to it and like, now this is me. And that's not true. That is, like you said, you're a person with epilepsy. And that's where we say, like, let's get you into something that you love doing. Let's find out what you love doing. Let's explain the level of risks so you understand that, and taking ownership of saying, okay, this is what I want for my life. This is the type of life that I would like to live. And you have your professionals. You have Epilepsy South Africa. You have your neurologist. You have your biokineticist to say, let's help you to get to that end goal, to find what drives you and what type of life is it that you want to live, and let's find a way to get you to that.
And it's definitely.
I think it is important as well that the patient themselves, or if it's a younger patient, then their parents, need to be open with the doctor or neurologist in terms of these are the concerns. This is about what sport, and they need to be transparent and open, and the doctor can level with them in terms of what they think is safe, what they think is not safe. Patients will often do the things anyway sometimes, but as long as they have that knowledge, that understanding, because even if they do something that is riskier, then just by them knowing that there is some danger means that they will take an extra precaution. They will take someone to watch them swim instead of them swimming on their own.
And I think that's really valid. I mean, I was going to say about Tim, because we never said it earlier, is that when you swim, make sure someone's with you. And or someone that's on the side of the pool, and say, I have epilepsy. Won't you I know you don't know me, but I'm going to swim. I am fit. I am controlled. I just need you to just be aware. Yeah. And I think that is just so important. There's so many sports. There's indoor, there's outdoor. And our discussion today has really covered the spectrum of sport. We've got a few more minutes, and I'd just like to hear closing comments from each of you on maybe something each of us have said that's just stood out, and you want to just pick up that and give it to our audience, that this is your closing remark on it. So I'm going to start with Deidre, because I keep going to Tim Prakash as starting, so I'll give that to you. So just let our audience.
Yeah, so I would just also, on what you said as well, is be honest with your medical team. Be honest with your support team. I think a lot of people are scared because they are so used to people telling them what not to do. But if you have the right team, be honest, and you can do what you want to do. We might have to modify it for you. We might have to say, let's take baby steps to get there before you go for your open water swim. We'll start with an indoor swim, but be honest and dream big and say, this is what I want to do, and let your team be part of it.
Lovely, yeah. Beautiful. Tim.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What I would say to people is first and most importantly, understand what you have, like I mentioned earlier. Understand what sort of condition you have, and then find an exercise or a sport that you'd enjoy doing. Mostly get the enjoyment out of it, and to do it with someone. It's always good to do things with people, but probably more responsible thing to do. But whether it be with a club or with anyone. But I mean, just follow the guidelines and you'll be fine.
Thank you, Tim. I love hearing from the two of you. What would you, just as a closing over there to the audience?
So I would say that I would like all people to do exercise, and if they want sport meaning like a competition, but even if they're not competing, as long as they do some sort of exercise, whether they have epilepsy or they do not have epilepsy. Also, I think that people with epilepsy should speak to their medical professional or support team about their condition and just level with them, be open in terms of what they want to do. And if the patients themselves are not wanting to do exercise or sport, then they have to think about it again and try and then, at least do some sort of walking or steps and that type of thing.
Good. Thank you so much. It's just been so wonderful hearing from each of you. And I think we're all on fire. I think sport is so part of our culture as South Africans. We sport and we all want to do sport. Well, I hope we all want to do sport, right? So I want to say to our audience today is that it's Youth Month. And moms and dads, schools, friends, family, and everybody that surrounds that young person or that elder person, whatever it is that lives with epilepsy. Support them, encourage that person to do sport, to move, and to be healthy. Because when you are healthy, your epilepsy is so much easier to get under control. It settles down. Your seizures will become more manageable. You can become more conscious. So I'm going to end with that and just say, because we can go on for hours on this topic, but I'd like to just end off by saying thank you for joining us today. And it has been an absolute privilege to address this topic and share this webinar with friends and family, because it'll really add value to many, many people's lives. Epilepsy South Africa is truly very focused on supporting you with education, supporting you with information, and helping everybody out there. And just like our logo and our slogan says, igniting the flame of potential. Ignite your flame of potential and be the very best of you that you can be. Be that person with epilepsy. So once again, thank you for joining us today. Have a beautiful day. Enjoy Youth Month and take care. Thank you.